Hello, everybody. This is Coach Ellis and I am here welcoming you to the video on the only 6 ways to grow your profits. The good news is there's only 6 things that we need to worry about in order to grow our business's profits. The bad news is there's only 6 things we can do to increase our profits. So let's learn about what those 6 things are and how to choose the right one to focus on to give us our biggest bang for our effort. My name's Ellis Mass, as I mentioned before. For any of you that don't know me, I've been doing this for 20 plus years, delivering outstanding business results to a wide variety of businesses. A lot of my background is in working with Fortune 100 companies, a lot of the times in marketing and strategic planning roles. I was fortunate enough to have some great experiences and be awarded the Brand Marketer of the Year award by Brand Week magazine. So that was a real fun highlight. And now, aside from being an adjunct professor in the business school down here, Broward College here in Florida, I am also a certified business coach. So I take what I've done for a number of years across a variety of businesses, and I help business owners and business leaders apply those same principles, techniques, and some additional tricks and tools and content for their own business. I'm affiliated, you might have noticed the logo in the corner, I'm affiliated with a group called FocalPoint. FocalPoint is an international group created by a guy named Brian Tracy, whom you might have heard of. Pretty famous guy and pretty smart guy. He's developed over the years a ton of great content, tools, coaching modules, etc. And I have access to all of those things as well and use that a lot in my practice. And some of the things we're going to be talking about today actually come directly from Brian, with my little spin on them. I do work by myself here in Broward County, Florida. We all work independently, but I do have access to the entire FocalPoint network of coaches across the US, Canada, and parts beyond. And I provide a variety of services. My little commercial here, I do group coaching online, so if you have an interest in a particular topic, let me know. I'll show you how to reach out to me at the end. I do VIP private coaching, and I love doing workshops and seminars. So hit me up if that's something that you think you or your business or trade association or whatever might need. Today, we're going to transition right into talking about the key challenge or challenges facing our businesses. At the end of the day, we want a few things in our business. So if I asked you what you want in your business, because I do ask this question all the time, chances are most of you would say something along the lines of, well, I'd like to get more customers. Okay, fair enough. More customers. Who wouldn't? I would too. How do we do that? Some of you might say more revenues. Okay, well, you can't get more revenues necessarily if you don't have more customers, although there are ways to increase revenue without increasing customers. And ultimately, some of you might say, I want more profits. We are savvy and we know that revenues are great, but profits are what we get to take home and keep, and that fuels our lifestyle and our personal assets and our retirement, etc. So profit is kind of the end game potentially for all this stuff. But at the end of the day, those are outcomes. All of those 3 things are outcomes. They're not actions. Right? We can't just all of a sudden wave a magic wand and say, you know what, I'm going to have some more profits today. I wish we could. I'd be out of a job, but I wouldn't need the job. I'd have the magic wand, so that would be fine. But we have to take some action to make those things happen. We all know this, right? But those are outcomes. How do we drive those outcomes? So what we're going to talk about today is the 6 basic ways to grow your profits. There are only 6, as we mentioned. Now, having said that, there are hundreds of variations on how to do this. Obviously, everybody's business is different. Even in the same category or industry, our individual businesses are different. We're better at different things, etc. So what I'm going to show you is really just a basic framework for how to apply this stuff. But you can apply this thought process to your business or any business, and you might need to put your own spin on how we execute. Easy peasy, right? This is going to be a very simple construct, just a really simple framework to lay this out. But I misspoke a minute ago when I said easy, because simple is not easy. And I think anybody who's ever tried to simplify something that's complex knows that that's not easy. And, in addition, it's all good and well for us to create this simple framework on paper, as we're going to do today. But actually executing that in the real world is going to take some hard work. So just because we're going to try and simplify things doesn't mean any of this is going to be easy. So I don't want you to be thinking that. This is all going to require some good hard work to implement. But the payoff, the reward will be there. Okay, so again, in order to grow profits, I'm going to tell you, this is all that you have to do. All that you have to do. We're going to look at all 6 profit levers today, and you need to look at all 6 of these in the context of your own business. You'll determine which one of those 6 is your critical constraint. They may all be constrained to some degree or another, but which is your critical constraint? We'll talk more about that a little bit later. We're going to focus on that one constraint that is our critical constraint, and then we're going to just work like hell to remove that constraint and focus only on that one until that constraint is removed or is no longer our critical constraint. And then, as the shampoo bottle says, we lather, rinse, repeat. Once we've knocked that constraint out, our business is going to accelerate. Our success is going to accelerate. We're going to start to achieve outstanding results. But then something else that wasn't our constraint before is going to become our critical constraint because we're doing so well at the thing that we had needed to work on. So there's always a critical constraint. It's just a question of what thing is constraining us, is holding us back at any given time. A constraint, we talk about critical constraints a lot at FocalPoint. A constraint is really anything that is standing in between you and your goal. Your critical constraint, though, there may be many constraints that are keeping you from getting to your goal as quickly as you can, but your critical constraint is kind of the main one, your rate limiting factor that is really holding you back the most. And after we go through this exercise, it'll be a whole lot more apparent which of your constraints is the critical constraint if that's not apparent already. Okay, we're going to start by, I'm going to let you just know, some of you may have heard of a book called The Way to Wealth by Brian Tracy, the founder of FocalPoint. This is a great book. You still can find it online, and if you can get your hands on it, I would say it's definitely a worthwhile read. A lot of the principles that we're going to talk about are directly from this book, The Way to Wealth. However, I don't use the title The Way to Wealth. You noticed I called this the 6 profit levers because often when I say, hey, The Way to Wealth, people misunderstand that and they think that that's some kind of investment strategy book or anything. It's not. What that book is what we're going to talk about today, which is how to generate wealth from your business in the form of profits. And we're going to talk about the 6 levers that you need to be able to pull in order to do that. Okay, so let's get started. I will just tell you, if you hang out till the end of the video, or skip ahead, I guess, if you want, I'll show you how to get this worksheet that you can download. It's got the entire formula, so feel free to take notes as you go through this video, but also feel free to download that. I'll show you how at the end. That'll make things a little bit easier, and that'll come with some tips on how to gather the information that you're going to need. Okay, but don't look at this yet. Let's go through it step by step. Again, refreshing what we said, what we want are ultimately the outcomes of more customers, more revenues, and more profits. So these are 3 outcomes that we want. I mentioned that there are 6 levers. The way that we kind of split this apart, the way to wealth, the 6 profit levers, is we take a look at each of these 3 things individually. We've got the customer formula, the revenue formula, and the profit formula. Each of those 3 steps have 2 of the levers called out in them. So we'll start with the customer formula. How do we get more customers? Are you ready? Are you sitting down? Because this is really complex rocket science stuff, right? If we want more customers, what we need is the elements of the customer formula. Drum roll, please. We need leads. So the customer formula is just the number of leads times our conversion percentage. That gives us our total customers. Sorry, I lied. It's really not rocket science, right? It's very, very simple. I promised you simple. Number of leads. Now, every business has leads. We'll define that a little bit more in a second, but you probably know what that is. And conversion percentage, just a question of how many of those leads do we turn into paying customers. So it's really simple, but these also happen to be, in order to get our outcome of customers, these are the first 2 profit levers, leads and conversion. So I need to know what kind of leads I'm getting, and I need to know how I'm doing converting them. Okay, let's talk about leads for a second. Again, probably obvious what these are, but how many people called? It depends on the kind of business. Some of us do a lot of business by phone. Hey, how many calls did we get? How many intake calls? How many people walked in the door? If we're a retail or storefront business, foot traffic is a huge metric. That's very important. That's a lead. Sometimes retailers will refer to that as draw, and then conversion percentage is close. Again, we use these terms differently. If we do a lot of business online, how many form fills did we have? How many web visits, etc. How many referrals did we get? Many of us have very, very heavily referral-driven business. And all of these things are leads. Now, there are some referral groups out there that'll say, well, a referral's not a lead. A referral's better than a lead. Referral, they're expecting to do business with you. Okay, fair enough. Referral is an extremely high-quality lead. I'm going to still go ahead and define that as a type of lead for the purposes of this conversation. All these things are leads. And the question that I have for you, it's a rhetorical question because I can't hear your answer, is are you tracking them? Because you should be. Some people are, and some people aren't, and you know who you are. If you're not tracking these leads, I'm going to encourage you to start tracking those leads now. And if it's logistically difficult to do because, it's hard to keep track of phone calls, find a way to do it, even if it's simple. It does not have to be fancy, but we do want to know how we're doing. We do want to know if we think that leads is our critical constraint, we need to be figuring out how we are improving in that area. Okay, let's talk about conversion percentage really quickly. It really is just simple math. What percentage of those leads become paying customers? We really care about them if they're leads, but we care about them even more if they become paying customers. We have to keep in mind, do we lose a lot of our prospects? Do we get a lot of leads in the door that we are not able to convert? By the way, are some of these leads that we don't really want anyway, right? Not a good fit for us, etc. We can talk about how do we get better leads that will convert better. Do we have a process in place to nurture or close these leads? If we don't, again, we may be leaving some money on the table. We may be able to improve our conversion percentage. Again, the question is, are you tracking your close rate? If you're not tracking leads, chances are you're not tracking your close rate, your conversion rate. If you are tracking your leads, this is something that you can easily calculate you're going to want to pay attention to. Let's do a quick mathematical example. The math is really simple. If I've got 100 leads, 100 people walk through the door to my widget store, and 90% of them went away buying something, then I've got 90 paying customers. Now, I know what some of you are probably thinking, particularly those that have not tracked that in the past. I'm not tracking this, but I know I've got 90 customers. I know what my total, I know how many jobs I did last year. I know how many tickets. I know how many transactions through my POS software. Okay, that's a start. So in some cases, it's actually better or easier to start off by working backwards. So let's start there. Let's presume that we know what our total customers were from last year, and let's kind of guesstimate what our conversion percentage was. Because again, it's preferable to be tracking it. If you've got hard numbers, that's way, way better, because oftentimes we do find ourselves surprised. But let's take a quick look and see if we can't figure out, okay, you know what? And again, I'm using my widget store as kind of an example. Your business is obviously different. I did 90 jobs last year. I sold 90 widgets, and man, of all the people that kind of came through, I'd guesstimate I closed about 90% of them. Again, if you've got intake forms, if you've got things like that, then you'll know. You don't have to guess. You can know. But if you don't, you can kind of go backwards and say, okay, that means I probably had about 100 leads. Again, going forward, track them. But if we're looking back, we can kind of at least guesstimate how we did based on the number of jobs, number of customers, et cetera, that we did. Because what we have to figure out is, for your business, what's the bigger opportunity? Do I need to focus on getting more leads? Or do I need to focus on closing more of the leads I'm already getting? Some of us are swimming in leads, and we just have a lousy or just not as good ability to follow up on them, where a lot of them are slipping through the cracks. We're not following up in time. We're not moving fast enough, etc. So we may not actually need to focus on getting more leads. We may need to focus on closing more of the leads that we're getting. Okay, moving on to the revenue formula. Once we've figured out how many customers that we've got and how we're going to increase that, how do we get more revenue? Well, the revenue formula starts with total customers that we just calculated. So we did all that already. That's an input to this piece of it. We multiply that by, let's say, our average ticket size, our average transaction size. Again, your terminology may be different depending on the business. Average job size if you're a plumber or a contractor or something like that. Average case size if you're an attorney, etc. And then we multiply that in order to make sure that this is kind of our annual revenue, is how many transactions per year or per whatever the time period is do we get per customer, right? So is this a one and done type business where we're not going to get a lot of repeat business, or do we get a lot of repeat business in the same year? Again, retailer. I mean, am I getting you to come back to my store often? And so that gets us total revenue. So again, it's a pretty simple calculation, but it does require that we're actually tracking and keeping track of some of this stuff. Some of it we may need to do some math based on some of the stuff that we've got. We know we have all our invoices from last year, so it's fairly simple math to just kind of calculate what that is, and we can kind of look at that over time and figure out how that's going to impact our revenue. Obviously, average ticket size and average transactions per customer, those are levers number 3 and number 4. You probably figured that part out. So let's talk real quick for a second about average ticket size. When we think about what type of work our ideal job is it a big ticket item or a small ticket item? Again, apply this to your own business. If you're a lawyer, what kind of cases are my ideal cases? Are they things that are long and drawn out and involved and, I can bill a lot for them? Or are they the quick things that I can knock out super quickly that may individually be small, but I can do a lot of them? If I'm a contractor, do I like quick renovation jobs that I get paid very quickly, or am I really good at some of these large commercial jobs? I'm great at bidding them, and I have a different focus for my business. The next question to ask yourself is, are you getting a lot of the type of job that you actually want, or are they relatively few and far between? Right? That goes back to the customer formula. Are we getting the right prospects in the door, not just the number of prospects? This is something that if we're not getting the average job size that we want, that we may need to even go back to the prospecting stage and take a look at that. We're going to talk about profit a little bit later, but clearly small jobs can be great if they're efficient, and big jobs, as we know, sometimes can be a little bit of a burden if they're not profitable, or if even from a cash flow perspective, we take longer to get paid on some of these big jobs. So keep that in mind as well. But right now we're just looking at revenue, and we look at average transaction per customer. Again, this is heavily dependent on what type of business that you have. So some of us, are a one and done. If I'm a personal injury attorney, chances are my client is not going to get in another car accident this same year. Hopefully if they ever do need our services again, they'll come back to us, but the chances are that's not going to happen in the same year. If someone comes, if I'm an estate planning attorney, someone comes to get a simple will done, they're probably not going to come back for that within the same year, but maybe they'll come back and do something else with me. If I'm a dentist, if I'm a dental office, hopefully I'm getting 2 cleanings out of you per year that insurance is covering. And in some cases, you're going to come back for maybe some additional work because you need a filling or a crown or something like that. Something to think about here is if we're not at our full potential in terms of our average transactions per customer, is there more that we can do to follow up with our good customers to increase frequency of jobs or transactions or whatever? Is there some kind of loyalty program or frequency program or use up rate program? We do that all the time in consumer packaged goods. Something like that we can do with practically any business. Also, do we have a process in place to identify some cross-sell or upsell opportunities that are a win for the customer? That last bit is really important. I'm not trying to encourage you to just hard sell your customers stuff that they don't need, but if you have the opportunity to take a happy customer that you've done great work for and find something else that's a win for them, you're just helping them all that much more. One example, we were talking about an estate planning attorney earlier. You come in for a simple will, you're probably not going to get another simple will done. But if I notice, hey, based on your assets and based on your family situation and based upon some of these other things that we identified, you might actually want to consider a revocable trust. Then maybe that's something that we should talk about. Well, that's a separate transaction. That's an additional transaction. If we're not looking for opportunities like that, they don't necessarily just fall in our laps. Let's have that cross-sell, upsell strategy in place where it's appropriate, where we can find that win for the customer. Here's the math. Really simple. We just take our total number of customers, which was 90. Let's just say my widgets or whatever, they cost $350. And you know what? I average, because I did the math on this, 1.25 transactions per customer per, let's say, year. This could be based on a year. This could be based on a month, but let's say we're using a year. You know what? Out of every 4 customers that buy widgets from me, 1 out of those 4 comes back at another point in the year and buys another widget for me. So my average transactions per customer is 1.25. If we do the math on that, that gets us revenue of $39,375. Okay. the thing to think about, again, in this realm, in the revenue stream, are there opportunities to increase your revenue, even if you don't increase customers? Now, hopefully, we figured out a way to increase customers from the customer formula, but even if we don't, maybe that's not our biggest opportunity. Maybe our biggest opportunity, we got plenty of customers. We're doing a great job closing them, but you know what? Our average ticket isn't that high. Or you know what? They're one and done. They're not coming back, and there is an opportunity to increase the frequency of jobs. If you've got a really happy customer that you've done really good work for, sometimes it's a whole lot easier to work with that existing customer base and find another way to provide value for them, rather than go out and spend your time and effort and marketing budget finding new customers. You got a happy group right here. Let's go to the profit formula. We start with our total revenue that we calculated. We multiply that by our gross margin percentage. Again, it's a pretty simple accounting equation here, and we subtract out our fixed costs. That is it. That gets us to our total net profit, and obviously gross margin and fixed costs. These are our fifth and sixth profit levers. So let's talk a little bit about each one. Let's start with gross margin percentage. Here's a question. I'm going to start off with a question. The first is, do you know your average gross margin percentage off the top of your head? I talk to different groups, different audiences of business owners all the time, and I could be in a group of plumbers, I could be in a group of attorneys, I could be in a group of general contractors or subcontractors. I ask the question, do you know your gross margin percentage off the top of your head to the group? And some of them are kind of confidently nodding their heads or raising their hands. Yeah, and they're like, duh, of course I know the gross margin percentage. And others are sort of uncomfortably shifting in their seats and kind of looking around. Doesn't matter what business you're in. This is something that you ought to know. Particularly if you do have a lot of variable costs. I mean, sometimes it does depend. Listen, some of our businesses, intellectual property, et cetera, service sector, there really are no variable costs, and it's all fixed costs. But for the most part, we should know what our gross margin percentage is. Even if you're not a numbers guy, know this number. Let this number be one that you know, and we'll talk about why in a second. But once you start to know that, you can start to evaluate, what types of jobs do I do that have the best margins? I keep taking this type of work and this type of work, and man, there's no margins in that for me. So it's a ton of effort, and I'm using my resources, and I'm not getting a lot of margin for it. Huge opportunity cost there, and man, I don't know if that makes a whole lot of sense for me. And by the way, margin percentage is important. It's a good indicator, but at the end of the day, what we bring to the bank are dollars. So do the jobs with the highest revenues tend to have your highest gross margin dollars? So hey, even if my margins are a little bit lower on some of these big jobs, I'm still bringing home more dollars than if I do a dozen of these tiny jobs. So we have to keep that in mind too. I'll show you how the math works on that. And we should know, and depending on how good of a job we're doing keeping our books, or we've got a great bookkeeper, a great accountant, etc., we should do a decent job on cost accounting and help understand which of our variable costs are reducing our margins the most. Again, some of us know this intuitively, but if you actually do some of the math, you might be surprised. So, hey, our labor rate we know is going to be big. If I'm an auto mechanic, maybe I'm taking a bath on parts and I'm actually doing okay on labor. And if I track this year to year, I can see what's impacting my profitability this year. Man, I'm taking less to the bank every week. Why is that? What's happened? What's changed? Know these numbers real well. Fixed costs, a little bit more straightforward. Rent, mortgage, insurance, salaries, and again, sometimes if we do labor, our model's a little bit different. Sometimes we'll schedule more hours and we'll be paying by the hour, and that's more of a variable cost. But we'll call this SG&A, salaries, general, administrative. Most of these, let's think about this in terms of our overhead costs. Now, there's really nothing that's a fixed cost in the long run, right? Pretty much everything we can change over time, but they're pretty big step functions. For many of us, if we're going to hire somebody, that's a significant consideration. We don't hire and fire necessarily willy-nilly, on a moment's notice. We don't move offices necessarily, every week. We might do that, and that we might take on a higher occupancy cost. But that's something that we'll decide on over a year, and it's kind of a step function. Gee, I need more room. We're getting really crowded. Let's do that. The other thing that I would encourage you to do if you're not doing this is to take a look at your costs and take a look at some independent benchmarks. So, for example, I have access to some information by industry, by size of company that kind of says, hey, roughly, here's what people tend to be paying in terms of salaries as a percentage of sales. Hey, here's what people in your industry tend to be paying for marketing costs, etc. So if you haven't looked at an objective benchmark, let's take a look. You might find some opportunities there. You might find, hey, I'm at a real significant competitive disadvantage and I really need to focus on this one and make my marketing dollars more productive, let's say, for example. Can any of these things be reshopped or renegotiated? I'll call out insurance as an example here. I mean, hopefully you've got a commercial insurance broker that, whether they represent multiple carriers or not, hopefully they do. Hopefully they're proactively shopping that for you. And they're saying, hey, I think if we looked at your policy this year, we may have an opportunity to save you some money. Let's ask for some concessions from the carrier. A really good commercial insurance guy will be able to help you do that. And so you should be looking for opportunities to improve your situation, even on your fixed costs. Many of us don't, and it's a missed opportunity. We're leaving money on the table, giving it to somebody else for their business. They're hoping you don't notice. They're hoping you don't reshop it. Let's do the math real quick. We start with our total revenue, 39 grand and some change. Let's just say our gross margin percentage on widgets is 35%. The remaining 65 is cost of goods and variable labor, let's just say. So by the way, if I calculate the math, and again, this is important, that means that I'm bringing home, temporarily at least, $13,781 worth of gross margin dollars in this time period, right? I don't get the whole 39,000 because 65% of it's going away right away. Let's say if I add up all my full-time salaries, my rent, my etc., that's $10,000. So what I'm left in terms of total profit, man, it's a little depressing. It's not a big number. $3,781. Again, this is just an example. This could be a year. This could be a month. This could be a week. So it depends on any number of things. I'm just really showing you how the math works. Don't know whether these numbers are the least bit realistic or comparable to what your business looks like. But at the end of the day, that's our profit. And all of the 6 things that we talked about can cascade through these equations and change that profit. So when we're looking at what our profit is, this is really just the first step. Now we got to figure out how we change those things to improve our profit and which ones do we have a shot at changing. So what comes next is that we apply this formula. So as I mentioned, if you want, I'll give you this worksheet that gives you the 6 profit levers. And what we'll do with it is we're going to take a look at where we are today and then make some determinations on what of these can we change and influence in a positive way for the future. So go to this website, BeOutstanding.Zone/profit. That's my website. You can just download this for free. You'll enter your email address. You'll get this. You'll get some tips in terms of how to apply that. And then what I want you to do is once you've got that, start filling out that today column. If you have been tracking a lot of this stuff, that'll be easy. If you haven't been tracking a lot of this, you might have to chase down some information. You might have to take some guesstimates or make some assumptions. But let's try and figure that out. And then once we do that, let's try and figure out which levers do we have our best shot at moving. If our conversion percentage is already really high, it's probably unrealistic to think we can improve upon that. There may be other better opportunities, and that may be where we should focus. So then let's kind of play with the future numbers, right? If we're able to improve any of those levers, what does that look like? If we change our conversion percentage from 50 to 55%, what does that do to profit if we cascade that all the way through? Once you change those numbers, it is simple math, and you can figure out, you can do this in a spreadsheet, you can get real fancy and figure out what's the impact to profit. I had a boss that used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze? You can figure out where you want to apply that squeeze that's going to give you the most juice. And that's really figuring out which of these levers is your critical constraint. Tackle that one first. That's going to give you the biggest bang. That's going to give you the most juice for your squeeze. Once you've done that, or once you've even just downloaded the worksheet, I would be more than happy to speak with you about it So you can email it to me if you would like. That's my email address, emass@focalpointcoaching.com. You can also go on my calendar directly yourself online, book a 20-minute call. We can go over that, or if you have questions or anything like that, feel free to give me a call there too. CoachEllisMass.YouCanBook.me. I do not charge for that. That is a free 20-minute call. They are first come, first serve. So if you're not finding a time slot anytime soon, then scroll forward a week or two or three or whatever, and feel free to book that, and we'll talk when I have that availability. I look forward to it. I hope that this was helpful to you. And I'm going to ask you, I'll end this as I usually end it. Whatever you're going to be outstanding. Thanks for your time and your attention. This is Coach Ellis Mass, and I hope to talk to you soon.